Good evening, everyone. My name is Barbara Dries, and I serve as a member of the Board of Directors for the Cathedral Heritage Foundation. On behalf of myself, Mary Schaffner, the board chair of the CHF, who is also here, and all the other members of the Cathedral Heritage Foundation Board of Directors, we want to welcome you to this long-awaited presentation by the Capecchi family about the work of their grandfather, Joseph Capecchi, the cathedral's Michelangelo, who transformed the almost barren, whitewashed brick interior of this cathedral into the vision that it is today. We hope you enjoyed hearing the organ music tonight. The sacred music director, Chris Gonza, recorded it for us this morning, and the recording feature is one of the special functions of our newly renovated organs. And even if Chris couldn't be here with us tonight, we can still enjoy his beautiful music. It is always our hope that greater awareness for this monument and the cathedrals within, both human and divine, will generate an emotional connection. We hope learning about this magnificent historical landmark church engenders a commitment in each of you to support it. The parish operating budget relies on grants from the CHF to do needed restoration projects, and there are many of them. And so we thank you in advance for your support this evening. 3 University of St. Thomas graduate students in the Museum Studies program contributed to the materials you will see tonight. Marilyn Burnett, Jessie Saffel-Bush, and Allison Sims, all 3 served as interns in our archives. Marilyn also served as our archivist, and all 3 assisted in locating the original colored sketches that have been stored away deeply on the back archive shelves. And now tonight, we celebrate the legacy of Joseph A. Capecchi, our cathedral Michelangelo, a remarkable artist and visionary, and grandfather to these fine gentlemen, Jerry, Mark, and Paul Capecchi. I welcome all of you to share this colorful and rich history of our beloved cathedral. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here, and it's a great turnout. Can you all hear me okay? If you can't during the night, let me know. First thing I like to do when I speak to a group is I kind of like to get to know the audience. So I've got 3 questions for you. The first is, how many people have been in this building before? Good. Secondly, how many people here have a forefather, ancestor, know someone who's contributed to the beautification of the building along the way? Raise your hand if you... Okay, that's good. And finally, how many people here are we related to? To that group, I've got one message. Mancini's after this for drinks. Okay? All right. So tonight we're going to be talking about our grandfather's role and our father's role, and a little bit our role in the beautification of this building. The St. Paul Cathedral is a family legacy. I think we all agree that it's the reason our family is here in Minnesota, in the United States for that matter. And it all begins with this man here, Joseph Capecchi. And but to back up a little bit, 2 years ago, the cathedral hosted the Cathedral Festival of Lights. And anybody see that here? It's beautiful. They projected light on the facade outside as well as the interior. And my wife let me know that we were volunteering for the interior portion of the show. So that night we were working in here, having a great time, love it in here. We spent a lot of time in here, and met Carolyn Will, who is on the Cathedral Heritage Board, and she said, "Would you mind telling I told her about the story, and she said, "Would you mind telling that story to a couple people. Maybe the Cathedral Heritage Board. And I said, sure. Well, one thing led to another, and then it led to tonight, which is outstanding. Our grandfather would be louder? Okay, that's them. That's them. Okay. So our grandfather would be very proud of this, but yet he would be very humbled by this. Our grandfather was a incredibly talented, very humble gentleman. And later on in the program, we will get to hear some words in his voice. So many families, the point I want to make is that many families share the cathedral story. A minute ago, many of you raised your hands because you had family members that worked here. So it's not just our cathedral story, it's all of our cathedral story. And that's why this building, this beautiful cathedral, is so cherished among Saint Paul, Minneapolis, Twin Cities, Minnesota, is because there are so many families whose legacy has come through this building. Our story happens to involve 3 generations. Now here are some examples of people that have worked on it over the years. Cathedral planners, sculptors, wood carvers, the list goes on and on and on. This is just to name a few. Every one of these craftsmen, artisans, had family here in Minnesota that take pride in the work that they did. And the Capecchi family is no different. And one of the things I'd like to point out as far as craftsmanship is the granite sculpture on the gable above the main entrance here. The stone carvers did this in place by hand with no pneumatics. This is all hand and chisel. And so, yes, they call my grandfather, very flatteringly, they called him the Michelangelo of the cathedral. There were many Michelangelos in this cathedral, and this attests to that. And one picture that jumps to mind, that stands out to me as far as many families being involved, is this picture here. This picture was taken in about 1906. It was the executive planning committee for the St. Paul Cathedral. Now keep in mind that when this picture was taken, these folks got together and they had a vision for this place. This place didn't exist. They had a vision. And because of their vision, this is here now. And there's one person in particular I wanted to point out, and that's this gentleman right here. And his name is Francis Erling. Any Erlings in the group tonight? Okay. Francis Erling, his grandson, Frank, married my aunt, Florence. And so what we have here among the Erling families is not only connection on their father's side, or on their mother's side through our grandfather, but also a connection on their father's side through Francis Erling, who was an original planner for this cathedral. So again, the point is many, many, many people are involved, and we are all somehow tied to this beautiful place. So this is one family's cathedral story tonight that involves 3 generations. And we're going to center around this gentleman right here, Joseph Angelo Capecchi. Originally, his given name was Giuseppe. Came through Ellis Island in 1906, went back as Giuseppe, went back to Italy for a while to serve in the armed forces to keep his status in good standing in Italy. Came back the second time through Ellis Island, signed his name Joseph. So he was an American at that point. He was born in 1889 in Florence. Died in 1983 here in St. Paul. He immigrated to St. Paul in 1906 to work for the Giuliani Statuary Company. And they were the precursor to the St. Paul Statuary Company that Joe Capecchi would eventually become president of. He married Louise Ungaretti in 1914, and they had 5 children: Florence, my father, Joseph E., Bernice, Lois, and their father, Paul. And here's a picture of Nonno, and you might be hearing one of us referring to him as Nonno throughout the night, Italian for grandfather. Our Nonno is pictured here, probably around 1905, before he came over. He was an apprentice sculptor in Florence at this point. And what's interesting is, anybody know who he's sculpting here? That is Saint Paul, and he would be coming to Saint Paul in a year or two. Joseph and Louise married in 1914. Louise Ungaretti, and here's a picture of their wedding party. And the reason I show this is because this individual right here, her son is somewhere in the audience here, Harry Walsh. Oh, you can't see my mouth? Oh, how can I point with my hand? Right. How about this? That is Alvina Walsh. That was her married name. I forgot what her anyway. So I thought I'd show that. Harry shared that with us. This is a picture of the Giuliani Statuary Company. And again, precursor to the St. Paul Statuary Company. Nonno left Florence, Italy in 1906 at age 17 to work for this group. Now, at that time, they were hiring many artisans because they knew this place was going to be erected. They knew that they were going to need them. And so it was a wonderful group of many Italian artisans that the amount of talent in that bunch was quite phenomenal. And here is a picture of the St. Paul Statuary Company and the Lohman Company party. Anybody remember Lohman's here? Yeah. Lohman's was a Catholic supply company. They happened to have a place right next door to St. Paul Statuary. And they sold a lot of the statuary from the St. Paul Statuary Company and other things. But they had a very close relationship, and looks like there were several of them there. And my grandfather would be right here. Okay. Again, here's a picture of Nonno about 1905 in Florence. A year later, he's on board a ship, coming to the United States, making his way to St. Paul, Minnesota, to work for the Giuliani Statuary Company. Now, if you were living on the corner of Fairview and Juliet back in about 1928 or so, and you look next door in your neighbor's backyard, you might see this guy sculpting a bust of Al Smith. Al Smith was a vice presidential candidate who, for some reason, Nonno thought a great deal of, and carved a bust of his likeness.
Now, is this in a yard? I lived on Juliet.
The question was, is this in the yard? She lived on Juliet. This is on the corner of Juliet and Fairview. In 1928. Yep.
It was probably now a house.
Well, this was their backyard. They built the house. Yeah. Nonno and Nonna built their house in probably the early 20s, I think. And he did a lot of sculpting in the backyard. Question? Good. The question is, what happened to the bust? The answer is, I don't know.
I do.
Mark?
I do.
Take it over.
Nonno was not a political person, but as Jerry said, he really thought the world of Al Smith, and he was heartbroken when he lost and he actually destroyed the statue after the election, so no one has it at this moment. It was very unlike him because he was so mild-mannered and such a gentleman, but his heart was really broken when Al Smith didn't become what he was hoping it would be.
Al Smith was the first Catholic to run for president.
Okay. First Catholic. Okay, thank you. I knew we had a smart group here, so that's great. What's funny is Mark had mentioned that he was not into politics. If you look at our coat of arms specifically says the Capecchi family is not involved in politics, but rather gravitates towards the arts. And that was right in line with that. This is a picture of the Florentine art company that Nanu ran. This is around 1914. I'm not sure how many years he owned this, but it was on 4th Street in St. Paul, and that's about all I know about that. I don't know the dates or but he did a lot of import work. And then we jump to the generation 2, which is Capecchi decorating. Mark and Paul's dad, Paul L., and my father, Joseph, worked for the St. Paul Statuary Company. In fact, my dad was working for the St. Paul Statuary Company the year they first decorated this building in 1950, 51, 52. And he's the only person that I know of that painted this place twice. But in 1956, they broke off, Paul and my dad and their dad Paul broke off from the St. Paul Statuary and formed their own ecclesiastical decorating firm, which is Capecchi Decorating Company. And by ecclesiastical decorating, I mean, painting, yes, but also gold leaf, stencil, glaze work, all the highly ornamental type of work, much of which you see here.
Yeah. I would like to add that they maintained a very close relationship with the St. Paul Statuary Company for many, many, many years. They formed their own business, but they were pretty much the right-hand painters whenever churches needed to be painted. They were the ones that the Statuary Company always called on to do the work.
And they were also very close in the fact that they lived 3 doors apart in West St. Paul.
Yes.
So that was a great company. Here's a picture of Joseph E., my dad, passed away in 83, and Paul's dad passed away in 2020. Again, founders of Capecchi Decorating. They were the painting and decorating wing of St. Paul Statuary, and then they branched off, and as Mark pointed out, worked very closely with St. Paul Statuary since then. Copy of an advertisement for Capecchi Decorating. It lists a lot of the churches that they've done, and here's more. I highlighted a few. For example, the state capitol, including the leafing of the quadriga and the ball atop its dome. We'll have some pictures of that. Also, of course, the St. Paul Cathedral. But first and foremost, they did the Grand Church of St. Mary's in Daisy, North Dakota. And the reason that's so special is because that's where my father met my mother. She was she lived on the farm that housed the painters for and there is a story in that I won't get into, but it's pretty incredible. So, La Familia, this is generation 3 now. Family members who worked for Capecchi Decorating. There was no nepotism here, it's just that we just happened to be Joe, John, and myself, all sons of Joseph. Paul, Mark, and Larry, all sons of Paul. And we have Paul Larson, who's a son-in-law, who's my brother-in-law, and John Kay, their brother-in-law. But many of us, well, let's see, Joe, John, myself, Paul, and Mark, we all went to St. John's University. And so the way it worked was we work all summer long for Capecchi Decorating. Every Friday we get a paycheck. We go to the bank, deposit it, and then come September we go to the bursar's office, write out a check, tuition's paid. And so it's really kind of a win-win situation. And we work all summer. Great time working with Capecchi Decorating, a lot of adventure in the up and high. And then we also got our tuition paid. So that worked out very well. And this is a picture, by the way, of my brother Joe, Dr. Capecchi, if any of you know him. They've probably delivered, I don't know how many people in St. Paul, but that's him contemplating whether he wanted to be a painter or an OBGYN. Here's a picture of Capecchi Decorating, in particular it's Paul, their dad, putting the gold atop the ball at the state capitol. That's a job that took a lot of pride in. Here's a picture working on the quadriga. That's my dad. That's Mark right here. And there's Paul. Again, applying gold on the gold leaf on the quadriga. That took a lot of gold. And a few pictures of St. Paul, or of the Capecchi Decorating. Here's a picture of Paul and Jean Hottinger. I'm going to put a plug in for Jean. Jean was their uncle, Paul's brother-in-law, outstanding worker. He was an employee of Capecchi Decorating for how many years, guys?
30 or more?
30 or more years. And so we all worked with Gene. He was always our boss. And you were telling me they took this picture. They wanted to put a plug in for Mott's Paint. They wanted to do a commercial for Mott's Paint. By the way, it's a great paint if anybody's looking for paint. But and this was done here in the cathedral in 1987 during some of the touch-up of at the time. A couple more shots of Capecchi Decorating touch-up work, 1987, St. Paul Cathedral. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the process of gold leaf. We use a lot of gold in here, and pictured here is the nimbus around the Christ figure in the St. Peter's Chapel back here. Mark is going to talk a bit about gold leaf at this time.
So gold leafing was one of the real specialties of what we did, and the gold is so thin we couldn't touch it with our fingers or it would disintegrate. So we would it comes in books or it would come in rolls, almost like a toilet paper roll. And if we had a big space that we had to fill, like the entryway down in here, you'll see in the ceiling that silver leaf. It's actually aluminum leaf because silver tarnishes. Jerry's dad, my Uncle Joe, put the silver leaf up there using rolls because you could work with a long expanse at one time. In the same entryway there's also an inscription that's carved into the wall, and there's gold leaf in there, which my dad did. And Jerry, being as modest as he is, just like her grandfather, in the St. Peter's Chapel over here, the gold that you see there, that's Jerry's work. But we did a great deal of gold and silver leaf. Also in the sanctuary, that's copper leaf up by the dove. So there's many different types of leaf, and to work with it, if we didn't press it directly onto the gold size, which is an adhesive, it's kind of like a slow drying glue that we would paint onto the surface, and then the next day we'd come by and be very tacky and the gold would stick to it. So we'd either press it against with the books of gold or with the rolls, or sometimes we would have brushes and we would rub the brush in our whiskers or our sideburns. It would make it staticky, and then you could pick up the gold and lay it on the surface of what you needed to be working on. We have a video, and it starts with an Italian gold leafer who you'll see that he's touching rubbing the brush into the whiskers on his face, and then picking up gold and laying it. And then after that, you'll see my dad and my Uncle Gene Hottinger working on some ornamental lights that from the house chamber, correct? From the house chamber, and my dad will explain a little bit about how they're putting the gold on. And in that one, rather than just having everything perfectly shiny, they wanted to put some darker marks in the recesses so that it would look a little bit more antique.
So let's take some time now and talk about or look at some of the art of Joseph Capecchi, and there's a lot of it around the Twin Cities, around the state. This just scratches the surface of some of the stuff he's done. A lot of the stuff he's done, we don't even know about it. First of all, these are his children in plaster. Joseph sculpted all of his children. This is Florence, his eldest daughter. My Father Joseph as a scout, my Aunt Bernice, my Aunt Lois, and my Uncle Paul, their father. So he took a lot of pride in his kids, and enough to put them in plaster. So, self-portrait. Joseph was very talented in many media, not just the sculpting. This is an oil self-portrait that he did, which I always thought was one of his best works, personally. Here are some stone sculptures that he did. If you're ever walking on Fairview, in the corner of Juliet and Fairview, 1823 Juliet to be exact, and I maybe shouldn't have said the address, but that's the house that Nana and Nana built and raised their 5 children. All my cousins here, how many people have been 1823 Juliet? Okay, we've all been there. We grew up there. Nanu sculpted the Aesop Fables characters, and if you go there today, you will see them. I don't know how many people have ever paid attention to it or noticed it, but this is the works of Joseph Capecchi. He hand-chiseled this, and the 1823 is in front of the house, facing forward on Juliet. The Aesop's Fable characters are along Fairview. So,
These are on the house?
no, these are on the question was, are these on the house? No, these are actually on a retaining wall right along the sidewalk on Fairview. Yeah, thank you.
I lived in 1849, Juliet.
You were 1849, Juliet.
This would be east.
Yeah, close by there. Yep. And I was just there last week, took this picture, let's see. Took that picture just last week. Had to clear the leaves away, but they're still in pretty good shape. It's fun to go see those. Anybody recognize this place? Yes. St. Thomas. Yes, this is St. Thomas. And along the Summit Avenue entry, you see a picture of St. Thomas Aquinas. My grandfather sculpted that, and he bartered with St. Thomas. That was my dad's sophomore year tuition right there. And so I think St. Thomas got a good deal on that. He sculpted Kateri, Lily the Mohawk. I don't know where this is. Does anybody know where this is? No. James J. Hill. He sculpted a larger-than-life-size image of St. James J. Hill. This was then executed in granite, and it's at a park up in St. Cloud, Minnesota. St. Luke's Church in St. Paul. This is the old St. Luke's. This is he sculpted 2 angels that were in the sanctuary, holding sanctuary lamps. I understand that they're still there. Anybody here see this lately? Curious? Okay. Somebody raise their hand back there. St. Francis Church in Brainerd. This is just these dome-shaped or half dome-shaped coverings above doors are known as lunettes, and this is one that he did in Brainerd. Here's a St. Mary's Church in Breckenridge, so again, a lot of outstate work. St. John's University. This was above the door, the side entrance to Humphreys Auditorium at St. John's. Mark, you saw that just about every day.
I walked, this was right outside my dorm, Bennett Hall. I walked past this probably 6 times every day for 4 years, and I had no idea that we had a family connection to it. And I happened to be looking through a book of my dad's that had a lot of these in it, and it said St. John's University. And I contacted the president of the school, who was my mentor, Father Bob Koopman, and I said, "Do you know where this is?" And he said, "Well, yeah, that's in the Humphrey Auditorium." And as a matter of fact, that same month it was featured in the Abbey Banner magazine, and the person that wrote the article about it had no idea that our grandfather is actually the one that sculpted it. And in the article he wrote about all the symbolism, because you're not an ecclesiastical sculptor without knowing all of the saints' symbols. And so the crow and the snake and all of the characters in there was very important to the Benedictines.
Question?
Was your grandfather passed away at this time?
I'm sorry?
Was your grandfather passed away at this time?
When we were at St. John's, he was still alive.
Yeah.
And he never told you? Or
No,
Well, there's a lot of things he never told us. Like I said, he was a very, very humble man. And when we talk about these things, it's an amazing story about the work he did up there. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, many things he was a humble man. Yeah. Okay. Shadow Falls War Memorial. How many people have been to Shadow Falls? You know, at the end of Summit Avenue. Yanu designed this, and it was based on his design that this was built. And it's called the World War Memorial because at that time they thought, there was no World War II. That was the only World War there was. And this was erected to dedicate all of the St. Paul men and women who died in World War I. And the Church of the Nativity. Any Nativity parishioners here? Few? Nativity was the home parish for Joseph and Louise and their families. He did quite a bit of work. In the front there is the lunette here and the 2 statues that he worked on. Here they are. The lunette on the right side, that's the finished product before it was put in place, and the statue in place. And again, when we're looking at statues, we're looking at not just one artisan, but many artisans. And you've got the Nanu did the sculpting out of the plastic, out of the clay, and then from there somebody will take that, and then a stone carver then will execute it in whatever final product, whether it's granite or kato stone or whatever. So many artists are involved in these processes. Frank B. Kellogg is in the state capitol, and so essentially what I wanted to point out is some of the work, but clearly not nearly all of the work that he's done, and it's in many different places. So now let's talk about our family's work here in the St. Paul Cathedral. Here's a picture of Nanu with a very good friend of his, the rector at back in the late 40s through the 50s, and that's Monsignor George Ryan. George Ryan here was the post-war rector who really spearheaded the decoration, the initial interior decoration of the cathedral. As was mentioned earlier, prior to this being done in the 1950-51, there was nothing painted here, nothing gilded. You know, you had the statuary, and you had the ornamental plasterwork, but you didn't have any of the gilding up here. So it was very bare in that sense. And Monsignor George Ryan was the one that envisioned this being completed. And in so doing, he contacted the St. Paul Statuary Company and my grandfather, and they became very good friends. They worked together on many, many things here. One of the earlier pieces that's in the Capitol is a plaque that's located at this end of the cathedral, just right of the baldaquinos, near the evangelist, and that is a commemorative plaque to Cardinal Pacelli. In 1936, Cardinal Pacelli, who then was the Secretary of the Vatican, was here and said a mass in this cathedral. A few years later, he was elevated to Pope Pius XII. And so they did have Nonu made a plaque and had it executed in bronze. Another one that he did, which is again in the same area, is a plaque for Archbishop John Gregory Murray. Plaque, again, executed it in clay, modeled it in clay, then it was executed in bronze again. And here's a picture of the sketch. Actually, it's right over here. The original is right here. And this is the sketch that Nonu did of the interior dome as he envisioned the color scheme should be. Now, when he did this sketch and put in the colors, there was no color up there. There's no paint up there. There's no gild, no gold. And based on this design, which was approved by Monsignor Ryan, they went ahead and painted the the cathedral for the first time. And so he did come up with this color scheme, and it was quite amazing how he was able to do that. Beautiful design. This particular sketch right here, a little story behind that, when my mother was moving out of her house in West St. Paul, we were all helping clean out the house, and in my father's basement drawing room was this. And I thought, boy, that sure would look good on my living room wall, but instead I thought, I think maybe the cathedral should have this, so we donated it to the archives, and I'm glad to have it. Here's an article that came out in the 1976 Catholic Bulletin. It featured Nonu. This was the year we were painting this for the second time. And as you can see, the picture is of him in his art room, and sitting on his easel is this painting. There's this drawing right here, this sketch. So in 1976, we painted it for a second time, which we'll talk about. But as far as the first interior decoration, the very first time this was painted, that was it was completed in 1954. Again, as pointed out, the decorating scheme was by Joseph Capecchi, by our Nonu. I'd like to read this while you all look up there, okay? This was a quote taken from Eric Hansen's book, The Cathedral of Saint Paul. Capecchi divided this surface area into richly bordered geometric shapes of various sizes. Though neither Masquerade nor McGinnis and Walsh had envisioned a painted, much less gilded ceiling, the result was much in keeping with the idea of a grand yet restraining interior. And further, to verbalize the joyful vigor of the forms of the ceiling, the text of Psalm 150 was painted at the base of the dome. Right now I'm referring to this right here. Can you see this dot here? Okay, there's a Psalm 150 is inscribed on that surface, and that reads as follows: "Praise ye the Lord in his sanctuary, praise him for his mighty deeds. Praise him for his sovereign majesty, praise him with timbrel and chorus. Praise him with strings and organ, let everything that breathes praise the Lord." And so every time I look at that band and I read that inscription, the only thing I can think of is, how on earth did he space all those letters so well? And it's all math, as Mark knows. It's all math. Yes?
One of the most beautiful features in the dome is right at the crown of the dome. And the lights are on, so you cannot see any of it. Is there a way you can turn the lights off so that can be...
Like right now? Okay, the question, the gentleman made the point that one of the most beautiful spots is the areas between what I call the starbursts, between those lights, but the lights are kind of blinding, we can't see it. Can we turn the lights off? We'll have to ask the maintenance folks. I don't know. I know you can, but...
That's the most disappointing part about the whole cathedral design and lighting. They do not show the crown of the dome.
Because of the lighting.
Because of the lighting.
Yeah, good point.
And they do not have sight lights up here that would help emphasize the crown of the dome.
Okay. Well, when we decompress after all this, we'll pass that on. That's a good point. I agree. All right. So the cost of the interior decoration in 1954 was, and that included, by the way, the mosaics, which we'll talk about in a minute, about $200,000. So, good deal. Okay, now we're going to switch our attention to the four mosaics, the cardinal virtues. The four cardinal virtues up top are temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. And one of the things that we stumbled on, that the Cathedral Archivist stumbled on in the last 6 months since I started talking with them, is they discovered Nanu's original paintings of the four cardinal virtues. Now he designed them, and he came up with a color scheme. What he did then was pull in the best people that he could to help finalize the product. Now, Nanu was friends with, and he knew well an Italian sculptor and a mosaic expert by the name of Michelangelo Bedini, and he worked for the Vatican Studios in Rome. So in collaboration with Mr. Bedini, Nanu designed the four virtues, and then he sent the designs over to Bedini in Rome, who then made them out of mosaic. Now, I think most of us understand what mosaic is. I'm going to see if I can. If you look a little bit, you can kind of see some of these are all individual stoneworks. These are not paintings. These are individual stones that are put into place, and to give you the effect of a painting from a distance. So once he sent that to Bedini, then Bedini made the mosaics, and eventually they were installed here, and we'll talk about the process in a minute. Here's the cardinal virtue of justice. As you can see, Nanu's design work, Bedini's mosaic. Prudence, Nanu's design, Bedini's mosaic. Fortitude and temperance. Now, as far as the installation of the virtues, it's a very interesting process. Once Bedini had the designs from our grandfather, Bedini then in Rome laid out the tile made these mosaics, and once they were all constructed on some type of a surface, I don't know what it was, but he laid it all out. He then took a material, it's almost like a resin material, poured it over the top, trawled it all out, so it was about a 1/4 inch thick. And once that dried, he then cut the mosaic into pieces, numbered all the pieces, packed them up, sent them to St. Paul. And once they're here in St. Paul, Nanu and his staff, his crew, had the surface prepared with some type of adhesive. They took each piece one by one, pushed them into place. And once they were all pushed into place and very dry, then took their water and sponges, washed off all this residue, and what was left behind, what appeared, is what you see. So it was quite a collaboration. And keep in mind, there was no texting and phone at that time. It was all snail mail. But I tell you, the art in this building is phenomenal. And that's just one piece of it. Question? The question is, do we know the size of those mosaics? And the answer is no. I don't. 13 feet. What? 13 feet tall? Somebody will know it here, I'm sure. What? 25?
I think so.
15 by 15, Father Hugo mentions. I'm sorry? These were put up as part of the end of the restoration of the decoration project. In 1953 they were put up. Yeah. Okay, now we'll put our attention onto the Stations of the Cross. You're all familiar with the stations, 14 stations. Nanu wrote up a proposal for the new stations back in about 1954, 55. They were put into place, I believe, in 56. And interesting design here, which we'll talk about in a second. Here, what we have a picture of here is all 14 stations. This is Nanu's work here. These then are executed in bronze, placed inside the oak cross, and these are your finished products right here. He charged, I think it was $500 per station at the time. And again, and Mark, you have a story about the molds on these.
When the stipulation when these were created, the contract was after they're completed, the molds had to be destroyed because they wanted these to be the only Stations of the Cross with this design in the world. So that is what happened. They were destroyed. What you see, these are one of a kind. They're priceless.
They are. And this is from the Voices from the Archives here at the Cathedral. It says, after reviewing Capecchi's designs, Monsignor Ryan, this is George Ryan, wrote in December 1955 accepting his proposals to design, execute, and install in the cathedral a set of Stations of the Cross for $500 each. Ryan added that he wanted it further understood that the models for these stations will be the property of the cathedral and will not be reproduced for any other church, chapel, or outdoor shrine, to Mark's point. And then he goes on to say that the medallions were designed and sculpted by Capecchi, then sent to New York to be cast in bronze. At their completion, Ryan wrote in the parish bulletin, they are simple in style and modest in their proportions. The way of the cross as a devotion is essentially a private devotion. We have kept this in mind. They will be bronze medallions set in heavy oak cross-shaped frames. The cross that frames the medallions is a Celtic cross in honor of Archbishop John Ireland. So that was the theme. And another thing that Nonu did was he sculpted the four lunettes above the side doors. This is the lunette above the Dayton portal. It's the oak tree. Here's another Dayton portal over here, the fish. On the Selby side, we have the book, and we have the ship. And again, Nonu executed these in clay. Stone carvers came in, executed them in stone. But now getting back to that house on 1823 Juliet, if you go into their basement above their fireplace, you'll see that. Nonu took the ship sculpture, must have liked that one the best, and he took after they modeled it in clay, he then took a plaster cast of it and had that set in above his fireplace in the basement. So the people that live there now are well aware of that, right, Mark?
My cousin Mike Leonard, there he is, and my wife Mickey, we went on a Nonu tour, and we went to the house in Juliet, and they graciously let us go inside and allowed us to take this picture of the ship. They were well aware of the history of the ship in their basement, and were really proud and happy to have that piece of history in their home.
And I would ask that only if you're a Capecchi should you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about the four evangelist statues. In the corners, base of the pillars, we have the four evangelists strategically placed at the base of the four main stone pillars. They were designed by a fellow by the name of John Angel. Died in 1960, which was sad because these were installed in like 1961 or so he was not here for the installation. And the quote is, "As the pillars hold up the church of stone, so the word recorded by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John sustains that church, not made of human hands." So they're strategically